The scream of twisting metal was the last thing Brielle Foster heard before the world collapsed around her. She'd been crossing through the construction site shortcut on her way home from her double shift at the hospital, exhausted and aching, when the scaffolding gave way. Steel beams came crashing down like the bones of some mechanical giant, and she'd thrown herself against the concrete wall, praying she'd be small enough to avoid the avalanche of destruction. Almost. The final beam caught her across the hip and leg, pinning her to the ground with a weight that drove the air from her lungs and sent white-hot agony shooting through her entire body. Brielle couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, could barely think through the waves of pain radiating from where the beam had her trapped. The construction site was abandoned at this hour, past midnight, and she'd been stupid enough to think taking this path would save her 15 minutes. Now she was going to die here, crushed and alone, because she'd been too tired to walk the long way around. Her vision blurred. Blood roared in her ears. She tried to shift, to push at the beam with trembling hands, but it might as well have been the weight of the entire building. Her phone was somewhere in her scattered bag, unreachable. The streetlights barely penetrated this far into the site, leaving her in shadows that seemed to pulse and breathe with her failing consciousness. Then she saw him. A figure emerged from the darkness, moving with a fluid grace that seemed impossible, inhuman. At first she thought her oxygen-starved brain was conjuring hallucinations. He was tall, impossibly so, dressed in what looked like a black coat that swept around him like wings. But it was his appearance that made her breath catch in her crushed chest. His skin was pale as moonlight, luminous in the darkness, and his hair fell to his shoulders in waves of pure white that seemed to glow with their own light. He looked like something carved from marble and brought to life, beautiful and terrible and completely wrong for this place, this moment. "Please," she managed to gasp out, the word barely more than a whisper. "Help!" He moved closer and she saw his eyes. They were a deep crimson, the color of fresh blood, fixed on her with an intensity that made her forget the pain for just a moment. Those eyes narrowed as they took in the beam crushing her, and something dangerous flickered across his perfect angular face. "Be still," he said, and his voice was like dark velvet, accented with something old and foreign that she couldn't place. Not British, not exactly European, something older. He moved to the beam, and Brielle wanted to tell him there was no point, that it would take machinery to move something that massive, but she couldn't find the breath. He bent down with that same impossible grace, and she saw his hand, long-fingered and elegant, grip the steel beam that had to weigh several tons. Then he lifted it. With one hand, the beam rose as easily as if it were made of cardboard, hoisted up and tossed aside with a casual flick of his wrist that sent it crashing into the debris pile 20 feet away. The sound of metal striking concrete echoed through the night, but Brielle was transfixed by what she was seeing. His eyes had changed. Where they'd been crimson before, now they blazed with a brilliant gold light that seemed to come from within, luminous and otherworldly. The pupils had contracted to thin vertical slits, like a predator's. As he turned that golden gaze back to her, she felt a primal fear override the pain, the recognition that she was in the presence of something far more dangerous than falling construction materials. "You're hurt," he said, kneeling beside her with movements too fluid to be human. "Badly. What are you?" The question escaped her lips before she could stop it. His mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Does it matter? You're dying." She wanted to argue, but the spreading warmth beneath her hips told her he was right. Internal bleeding, probably. She'd seen enough trauma cases in the ER to know the signs. Minutes maybe, not hours. "Then why did you save me?" Her voice was getting weaker. That golden gaze held hers, and she saw something flicker in those inhuman eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or something else. An excellent question. He reached toward her, and she saw his fingers were tipped with what looked like claws, short but wickedly sharp, gleaming in the dim light. She should have been terrified, should have tried to scramble away, but she was so tired and the pain was fading now into a distant numbness that she knew meant shock. "I can save you," he said softly. "But the price is high, higher than you can imagine." "What price?" She could barely form the words now. He leaned closer and she could see that his canine teeth were elongated, coming to delicate points. Fangs. He had fangs. "Your mortality, your human life. Everything you knew would change. You would become something else. Something like me. Vampire." The word floated through her fading consciousness. He was a vampire. They were real. The legends, the stories, the movies, all of it based on something real, and she was lying in the arms of one as her life bled away into the concrete. "Will it hurt?" she whispered. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, but you'll live, truly live, in ways you cannot yet comprehend." Brielle thought of her empty apartment, her exhausting job, her student loan debt that would take decades to pay off. She thought of her parents, dead in a car accident 3 years ago. Her few friends who'd drifted away after she'd had to drop out of medical school. What was she leaving behind, really? "Do it," she breathed. Something flashed in those gold eyes, approval perhaps, or respect. He lifted her with impossible gentleness, cradling her against his chest as if she weighed nothing. She could feel the cold of him even through his clothes, but it was soothing against her feverish skin. "My name is Drakul Vasiliu," he said softly, his lips near her ear. "Remember it, when you wake you will be reborn into a new world. My world." Then she felt his fangs pierce her throat and the world exploded into sensation. It did hurt, but not the way she'd expected. It was fire and ice together, racing through her veins, rewriting something fundamental in her blood and bones. She wanted to scream but couldn't find her voice, wanted to fight but couldn't make her body obey. All she could do was cling to him as the transformation tore through her like a storm, destroying everything she'd been and rebuilding her into something new. The last thing she felt before darkness took her was his wrist pressed against her mouth, and the taste of his blood on her tongue, ancient and powerful and utterly intoxicating. When Brielle opened her eyes again, everything had changed. The darkness was gone. She could see every detail of the room. She was in a bedroom decorated in dark woods and rich fabrics that looked like they belonged in a museum. Tapestries hung on stone walls, candles burned in silver holders, though she didn't need their light. She could see perfectly every thread in the sheets she lay on, every grain in the wooden beams of the ceiling high above. She could hear everything too. Footsteps somewhere in the building, at least 3 floors away. Voices speaking in languages she didn't recognize. The rustle of wind against windows. The beating of hearts, so many hearts, scattered throughout what must be an enormous structure. And she could smell blood. The realization made her sit up abruptly, and the movement was too fast, too smooth. One moment she was lying down, the next she was on her feet beside the bed, swaying slightly as her new body adjusted to the speed of her reflexes. "Easy." The voice came from the doorway, and she spun toward it. Drakul stood watching her, and in the candlelight she could finally see him clearly. He was devastatingly beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. His white hair was pulled back from his face, revealing features that were sharp and aristocratic, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, a mouth that looked made for cruelty or kissing. He wore different clothes now, dark pants and a white shirt that looked like it cost more than her monthly rent used to. His eyes had returned to that deep crimson color, watching her with an intensity that made her hyper-aware of every inch of her own body. "What did you do to me?" Her voice sounded different, clearer, somehow musical. "I saved your life, as promised." He moved into the room with that predatory grace, and she found herself tracking every movement. "How do you feel?" "I feel," she stopped, trying to process the sensory overload. "Everything. I feel everything. It's too much. It will settle. In time you'll learn to control it, to filter out what you don't need." He stopped a few feet away from her, studying her face. "You're adapting well. Many newborns are quite mad for the first few hours." "How long was I out?" 3 days. The transformation takes time. 3 days. She'd been unconscious for 3 days while her body died and was reborn as something else. The enormity of it started to sink in, and she felt panic rising in her chest. "My job, my apartment. People will be looking for me, all handled." His tone was matter of fact. "Your landlord was informed you had a family emergency and moved away suddenly. Your possessions have been retrieved and are in storage. Your job was notified of your resignation." As far as the human world is concerned, Brielle Foster simply left the city. The casualness with which he'd dismantled her entire life made anger flash through her. "You had no right, I had every right." His voice didn't rise, but the authority in it made her words die in her throat. "You chose this. You asked for this. Did you think you could return to your human life after becoming what you are now? Did you think you could work in a hospital, surrounded by blood, and maintain control?" The mention of blood made her throat burn with sudden vicious need. She gasped, clutching at her neck as the sensation overwhelmed her. It wasn't pain, exactly. It was hunger, so profound and consuming that it made every other need she'd ever felt seem trivial. Drakul's eyes flashed gold for a moment, and then he was beside her, moving too fast for her to track. His hand caught her wrist, keeping her from clawing at her own throat. "Breathe. Focus on my voice. The bloodlust is strongest in the beginning. You must learn to master it or it will master you. I need—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't put words to the craving that consumed her. "I know." His other hand came up to cup her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. The crimson had bled into gold again, swirling like liquid metal. "Look at me, only at me, feel my power. I am your sire. My blood runs in your veins. You can draw strength from me until you learn to find your own." She didn't understand what he meant, but as she stared into those hypnotic eyes, she felt something shift inside her. A connection like a silver thread linking her consciousness to his. Power flowed along that thread, ancient and vast, and it pushed back against the hunger just enough for her to think clearly again. "Better?" His voice was softer now, almost gentle. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Good, come. It's time for your first feeding. You'll need to learn properly, and I won't have you turning into a mindless monster because you couldn't control yourself." He released her face but kept hold of her wrist, leading her toward the door. Brielle let him guide her through corridors that looked like they belonged in a castle. Stone walls, vaulted ceilings, paintings that she suspected were originals worth millions. Other figures moved through the halls, and she realized with a start that they were all like Draco, pale-skinned, white-haired, moving with that same fluid grace. Vampires. All of them. They watched her as she passed, their eyes following with unconcealed curiosity. She heard whispers in languages she didn't recognize, though somehow she understood snatches of meaning. The king's newborn. So young. Why did he turn her? King, they'd called him King. Draco led her into a great hall that took her breath away. The space was massive, lit by hundreds of candles in elaborate chandeliers. A long table dominated the center, surrounded by high-backed chairs that looked like thrones. At the far end, on a raised dais, sat an even larger chair carved from what looked like black stone and inlaid with silver. But it was what was kneeling in the center of the room that made her freeze. A human, a man middle-aged and trembling, with a cloth tied over his eyes. The scent of his blood hit her like a physical blow, and the hunger roared back with devastating force. No. She tried to pull away from Draco, but his grip on her wrist was iron. I can't, I won't kill someone, you need to feed. His voice was implacable, and he volunteered. All our blood donors do. Volunteer? She tore her gaze away from the kneeling man to stare at Draco. You expect me to believe that? Believe what you wish, but it's the truth. He pulled her forward inexorably. We are not mindless killers, Brielle. We are a society, with laws and codes as old as human civilization. We take only from the willing, and we take only what we need. This man will be compensated handsomely for his service and will remember nothing of this night. The other vampires had filled the hall now, taking seats around the table. She realized with a sinking feeling that this was some kind of ceremony. They were all here to watch her first feeding. I don't want an audience, she said desperately. You are the first vampire I have sired in 300 years. Draco's voice was quiet, meant only for her ears. They need to see that I haven't lost my touch, that my bloodline remains strong, and you need to learn that feeding is not shameful. It is what we are. We do not hide from it. He released her wrist and stepped back, leaving her standing alone before the kneeling man. The hunger was agony now, burning through her veins like acid. Her fangs had descended without her willing it, sharp points pressing against her lower lip. Go on, Draco said softly. I'm right here. I won't let you hurt him. Brielle moved forward on trembling legs. The man didn't move, didn't seem afraid. His heartbeat was steady, calm. She knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she reached for the cloth covering his eyes, then decided to leave it. Somehow it seemed kinder if he couldn't see her. She leaned in close, breathing in the scent of his blood, and the last of her control shattered. Her fangs found his throat with an instinct she didn't know she possessed, and then his blood was flooding her mouth, hot and sweet and more intoxicating than anything she'd ever tasted. Powers surged through her with every swallow. The weakness she'd felt since waking vanished, replaced by a strength that made her feel invincible. She could hear everything now, the man's heartbeat slowing slightly, the whispers of the watching vampires, the crackle of the candle flames. She could feel the life flowing into her, sustaining her new existence. Then Draco's hand was on her shoulder, gentle but firm. Enough. It took everything in her to pull away, to close the wounds with a swipe of her tongue the way instinct told her to. The man slumped slightly, and two other vampires moved forward to carry him away. She remained kneeling, her body thrumming with new strength, her mind reeling from what she'd just done. Draco's hand extended before her, and she looked up to find him watching her with something that might have been pride. Well done. You maintained control. Many newborns kill their first owner. She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. The assembled vampires were watching her with new interest, their crimson eyes gleaming in the candlelight. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but Draco's presence beside her was oddly comforting. My court, Draco said, his voice carrying through the hall with ringing authority. I present to you Brielle Foster, newly reborn into the blood. She is of my line, under my protection, and will be accorded all the respect due to one of royal lineage. The vampires rose as one, placing fists over their hearts and bowing slightly. The gesture was clearly some form of acknowledgement, and Brielle found herself overwhelmed by the formality of it all. A woman stepped forward from the crowd, and Brielle's new senses took her in with perfect clarity. She was stunning, with the same white hair and pale skin as the others, but her eyes were a vivid violet rather than red. She wore a gown that looked medieval in style, all flowing silk and intricate embroidery. My lord, the woman said, her voice cool and musical, might I ask why you've broken your vow? For centuries you've refused to create new vampires. What makes this girl so special? The challenge in her tone was clear, and the hall went very quiet. Brielle felt Draco tense beside her, his hand still holding hers. I need answer to no one, Mihaela, he said softly, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Not even you. Mihaila's eyes flashed with something that looked like hurt quickly masked. Of course, my lord, I merely wonder in silence. He dismissed her with a gesture and turned to the rest of the assembled vampires. The presentation is complete. You may return to your duties. The vampires filed out, and Brielle caught curious glances and calculating looks thrown her way. Mihaela was the last to leave, and the look she gave Brielle was pure poison before she swept through the doors. I've made an enemy already, Brielle said quietly. Mihaela was hoping I would turn her, Drakel said, releasing her hand and moving toward the throne-like chair on the dais. She's been hoping for 200 years, she'll adjust. 200, Brielle shook her head, still struggling to process the timescales these creatures operated on. How old are you? He settled into the chair with regal ease, looking every inch the king they'd called him. I stopped counting after the first millennium. The number made her dizzy. 1,000 years. More than 1,000 years. He'd been alive when what? When was 1,000 years ago? The Middle Ages? Earlier? Why did you turn me? The question burst out of her. She's right. What makes me so special? I'm nobody. I was just a broke nurse who was stupid enough to take a shortcut through a construction site. His crimson eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Do you believe in fate, Brielle? I don't know anymore. I didn't used to. I was walking through that construction site because I'd sensed something. A pull, a compulsion. I've learned over the centuries not to ignore such feelings. They usually mean something. He leaned forward slightly. And then I saw you crushed beneath that beam, dying. And I looked into your eyes and I knew. I don't know what I knew or why, but I knew I couldn't let you die. The raw honesty in his voice stunned her. That's it? A feeling? Vampires live by instinct as much as reason. I've survived this long by trusting mine. He stood, descending from the dais to stand before her. I don't regret my choice, do you? She thought about it. The hunger, the overwhelming sensory input, the loss of everything familiar, it should have made her regret it. But looking up at him, at this ancient powerful being who'd saved her for reasons even he couldn't fully explain, she found she couldn't bring herself to wish it undone. No, she said softly. I don't regret it. Something flickered in his eyes there and gone too quickly to identify. Good, then come. You have much to learn about your new life and we should begin. The next weeks passed in a blur of lessons and revelations. Drakel taught her everything: how to control her strength, which was far greater than any humans but still nothing compared to older vampires. How to move with the preternatural speed that made her feel like she was flying. How to feed without killing, taking just enough to sustain herself. How to filter the overwhelming sensory input so she wasn't constantly drowning in stimuli. He taught her about vampire society too. They lived in a hidden kingdom beneath the city, accessible only through secret entrances scattered across the metropolitan area. This castle, and it was a castle, complete with towers and battlements, built into an enormous cavern system, had stood here for 500 years, predating the city above by centuries. There were other vampire kingdoms throughout the world, each ruled by ancient vampires who maintained a delicate balance of power. Drakel was one of the oldest, one of the most powerful. His territory encompassed the entire eastern seaboard, and his word was absolute law. Other vampires came to him seeking favor, permission to enter his lands, or arbitration in their disputes. She watched him hold court from that black throne, dispensing judgment with a fairness that surprised her and a ruthlessness that didn't. He was utterly compelling. She found herself drawn to him in ways that went beyond gratitude, or the mystical bond between sire and progeny. When he was teaching her, he was patient and encouraging. When he was ruling his court, he was commanding and powerful. And in rare quiet moments, when it was just the two of them in his private chambers, she caught glimpses of something else, a loneliness that perhaps came from living 1,000 years, watching everyone you might care about age and die. Do you ever regret it? She asked him one evening. They were in his study, a room lined with books in dozens of languages. She'd discovered that she could now read languages she'd never learned. Apparently the vampire transformation had granted her access to knowledge in Drakel's blood. Being immortal, watching the world change around you. He looked up from the papers he'd been reviewing. Apparently even vampire kings had paperwork. Every day, and never. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. He set the papers aside and regarded her thoughtfully. Immortality is a paradox. Every day is both too long and too short. You watch wonders rise and fall, see beauty and horror in measures that would break a mortal mind. You lose everyone you care about, eventually. But you also get to experience things that mortals can only dream of. I've seen empires rise and fall. I've walked in the shadow of pyramids when they were new. I've witnessed the birth of religions and philosophies that shaped human history. How can I regret that even when it hurts? Have you ever been in love? The question escaped before she could stop it, and she felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment that her pale skin probably made obvious. His expression shuddered immediately. Once. A very long time ago. What happened? She was mortal. I was young and foolish enough to think love would be enough. It wasn't. The pain in his voice was ancient but still raw. She aged while I remained unchanged. In the end, she begged me to turn her, to let her join me in immortality. I refused. Why? Because she deserved better than this half-life. He gestured around them, encompassing the castle, the darkness, everything. She deserved sunlight and children, and a natural death surrounded by grandchildren, not an eternity of blood and shadows. She didn't think so. No, she hated me for it, died hating me. He looked away. I vowed never to create another vampire after that, never to risk caring that much again. Brielle's heart ached for him for the pain he'd carried for how long? Centuries? But you turned me, yes. He looked back at her and his eyes were pure gold now, burning with emotion. I broke my vow for you, Brielle Foster. I still don't fully understand why. The air between them felt charged with something electric. She found herself moving closer without deciding to, drawn to him like gravity. Maybe you should stop trying to understand it, perhaps. His hand came up to cup her cheek, and she leaned into the touch. His skin was cool, like marble, but somehow it didn't feel cold. You're playing with fire, little one. I am not a good man. I've done terrible things across the centuries, killed thousands, destroyed kingdoms. I am a monster by any definition. I don't care. And she realized it was true. Whatever he'd done in his past, the man before her now had saved her, taught her, protected her, had shown her patience and even kindness. We're all monsters now, aren't we? He laughed, a sound she'd rarely heard from him. It transformed his face, making him look younger, almost human. I suppose we are. Then he kissed her, and the world fell away. His mouth was cool against hers, but ignited heat everywhere it touched. She pressed closer, her hands fisting in his shirt, and felt his arm wrap around her waist to pull her against him. The kiss deepened, turned hungry in ways that had nothing to do with blood. She could feel his power washing over her, ancient and vast, but instead of being frightening, it was intoxicating. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unnecessarily hard from pure emotion, his eyes were molten gold. Brielle, he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. We should not, don't. She pressed her fingers to his lips. Don't tell me all the reasons this is a bad idea. I've had enough bad ideas in my life. This doesn't feel like one. He caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. You don't understand. The bond between sire and progeny is powerful. You may be feeling loyalty or gratitude confused with I'm not confused. She met his eyes steadily. I know what I feel, and I think you know what you feel too. You're just afraid. The accusation hung between them. For a moment she thought she'd gone too far, that he would retreat behind the cold kingship he wore like armor. But then his shoulders sagged slightly, and he looked at her with such raw vulnerability that her heart broke and mended at the same time. Yes, he admitted quietly. I'm terrified. I've lived 1,000 years, Brielle. I've faced armies and ancient powers and the slow death of time itself, and nothing has frightened me as much as what I feel when I look at you. She reached up to touch his face, tracing the sharp line of his cheekbone. Then we'll be terrified together. He caught her hand again, turned his head to kiss her wrist where her pulse would have beat if she still had one. You make it sound so simple. Maybe it is. Maybe we're the ones making it complicated. Before he could respond, the door to the study burst open. Mihaela stood there, her violet eyes wide with alarm. My lord, we have a problem. The Eastern Border Patrol has been attacked. Drakel was on his feet instantly, the vulnerable man replaced by the warrior king. How many dead? 3. And the attackers left a message. She held out a piece of paper that looked burned at the edges. Drakel took it, read it, and his expression went deadly cold. His eyes blazed pure gold, and Brielle felt power rolling off him in waves that made the air crackle. Vaziel, that treacherous dog. Who's Vaziel? Brielle asked, moving to stand beside him. Another vampire king. He rules the southern territories. Drakel crushed the paper in his fist. We've been enemies for 500 years. Apparently he's decided to make his move. What does the message say? He looked at her, and something in his expression made her blood run cold. He wants to meet, to discuss terms. And he wants me to bring you. Me? Why would he care about me? Because you're mine. The possessiveness in his voice sent shivers down her spine. You're my weakness, and he knows it. Mihaela's eyes widened. My lord, surely you won't. I will meet him. Drakel cut her off. But on my terms, in my territory. Send word that I'll receive him in the Great Hall tomorrow at midnight, and gather the court. I want every vampire in the castle present. Mihaela bowed and left, and Brielle grabbed Drakel's arm. What are you doing? If I'm a weakness, if he's going to use me against you, he's going to try. Drakel pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her protectively. But I won't let him succeed. You are mine, Brielle. Mine to protect, mine to defend. Any threat against you is a threat against me, and I have never lost a battle. The fierce protectiveness in his voice should have made her feel like a possession. Instead, it made her feel cherished in ways she'd never experienced. She wrapped her arms around him, holding tight. I don't want to be the reason you go to war. You're not the reason. Vasil has wanted my territory for centuries. You're just the excuse he's using. He pulled back enough to look down at her, and his expression softened. But I won't lie to you. This is dangerous. He's nearly as old as I am, nearly as powerful. If he's moving openly, he must believe he can win. Can he? No. The confidence in that single word was absolute. Not while I have something worth fighting for. The next evening, the great hall was packed with vampires. Every member of Dracul's court had assembled, along with guards stationed at every entrance. The tension was thick enough to taste, and Brielle felt it pressing down on her as she stood beside Dracul's throne. He'd insisted she'd be there, visible at his side, a statement to Vasil that he wasn't ashamed of his choice or his feelings. She wore a gown he'd provided, deep crimson silk that pooled on the floor around her feet. Her white hair, still strange to see when she caught her reflection, was unbound, falling in waves down her back. She looked like one of them now, like she'd been born to this world of darkness and power. Dracul sat on his throne, dressed in black that made his pale skin and white hair almost luminous. His eyes were crimson, cold and hard as rubies. He looked every inch the immortal king, ageless and powerful and utterly untouchable. The doors opened, and Vasil entered. He was as tall as Dracul, with the same white hair and pale skin, but where Dracul's features were sharp and aristocratic, Vasil's were cruelly beautiful. His eyes were amber like a wolf's, and they fixed on Brielle with an intensity that made her want to hide behind Dracul's throne. Dracul. Vasil's voice was smooth as poisoned honey. Thank you for agreeing to meet. You attacked my territory and killed my people. Dracul's voice was ice. I could have simply declared war. Consider this mercy, mercy. Vasil laughed, moving closer with a predatory grace. Is that what we're calling it? I think curiosity is more accurate. You wanted to know what I wanted badly enough to risk your wrath. I know what you want. My territory, my power, my throne. The same things you've wanted for 5 centuries. Ah, but now I have leverage. Those amber eyes fixed on Brielle again. Your little pet. Your first progeny in 300 years. She must be very special. Dracul's power filled the room like a physical presence, and several of the younger vampires stepped back involuntarily. Choose your next words very carefully, Vasil. Or what? You'll start a war that could decimate both our courts? Vasil circled closer, and Brielle saw the guards tense. I have a proposal, a challenge in the old way. You and I in single combat. Winner takes all, both territories, both courts. And if I refuse, then I continue picking off your people one by one. I have allies now, Dracul. Other kings who are tired of your arrogance, your insistence on those ridiculous feeding laws. We could bleed you dry over decades. He smiled, showing fangs. Or you could face me like the warrior you claim to be. The hall was utterly silent. Brielle felt like she couldn't breathe, even though she no longer needed to. She wanted to scream at Dracul not to do it, not to risk himself, but she knew she couldn't. Not here, not in front of his court. Dracul stood, and his presence seemed to fill the entire space. I accept your challenge. Name your terms. Tomorrow night, in the ancient arena beneath the city. Single combat, no interference, fight until one of us yields or dies. Vasil's eyes gleamed with triumph, and the girl stays here as insurance that you don't try anything clever. No. The word was absolute. She comes with me, or the deal is off. Then how do I know you won't have your court ambush me? Because I give you my word. And unlike you, my word means something. Dracul descended from the dais, moving to stand directly before Vasili. They were of a height, and the power radiating from both of them made the air shimmer. Tomorrow night, come alone as I will, and when I win, you will swear fealty to me and leave my territory forever. And when I win, I take everything. Vasil extended his hand. Agreed? Dracul took it, and Brielle saw both their eyes flash gold as power sealed the bargain. An old magic, binding and absolute. Agreed, Dracul said. Vasil left with a mocking bow, and the moment the doors closed behind him, the hall erupted in voices. Vampires were arguing, shouting, some supporting the decision and others calling it madness. Dracul raised a hand, and silence fell instantly. The challenge has been accepted. There will be no further discussion. His eyes swept the assembly. Tomorrow night I will defend my kingdom. Until then I expect absolute loyalty. Anyone who has doubts about my ability to win is welcome to leave now. No one moved. Dismissed. The vampires filed out, and Brielle finally let herself move, rushing to Dracul's side. You can't do this. There has to be another way. There isn't. He caught her shoulders gently. This has been building for centuries. Better to face it now on my terms than let him chip away at my power until I'm too weak to stop him. But what if she couldn't finish the sentence? What if you lose? What if you die? What if I lose you right after finding you? I won't lose. He pulled her close, and she felt him press a kiss to the top of her head. I have too much to live for now. They spent the remaining hours before dawn in his chambers. They didn't make love, though the desire was there, simmering between them. Instead, they talked. He told her stories of his long life, the wonders he'd seen, the mistakes he'd made, the moments of beauty that had sustained him through centuries of darkness. She told him about her short human life, the loss of her parents, her dreams of becoming a doctor that had been derailed by debt and circumstance. "If I'd met you when you were human," he said softly, "would you have given me the time of day?" She laughed. "I would have thought you were a gorgeous weirdo who was probably in some kind of theatrical production. I definitely wouldn't have believed you were a vampire. And now? Now I can't imagine my life without you, even though we've only known each other a few weeks. Is that crazy? If it is, we're both mad." He tilted her chin up, his crimson eyes soft. "I love you, Brielle Foster. I shouldn't. It's dangerous and foolish and will probably end in heartbreak. But I do." Tears, blood tears, she realized. Vampires cried, blood tracked down her cheeks. "I love you too, which is why I'm terrified of tomorrow. Don't be." He wiped away her tears with gentle fingers. "I've survived 1,000 years. I'm not going to let some ambitious fool end me now. Not when I finally have something worth surviving for." The arena was ancient, carved from living stone deep beneath the city. It was a circular space perhaps 100 feet across, ringed by tiers of stone seats that were currently packed with vampires. Both courts had assembled Dracals and Vasils along with representatives from other vampire kingdoms who'd come to witness this historic challenge. Brielle sat in the front row, flanked by members of Dracal's guard. She'd argued about being here, about being forced to watch, but he'd insisted. "I want you to see," he'd said. "I want you to witness my victory." Now watching him descend into the arena, she wondered if his confidence had been misplaced. Dracal had stripped down to just black pants, his torso bare and revealing a body that looked carved from marble, all lean muscle and pale skin marked with scars that told stories of ancient battles. He moved with that predatory grace, his white hair unbound and flowing around his shoulders. Vasil entered from the opposite side, similarly dressed, and Brielle saw he was just as physically imposing. The two vampire kings met in the center of the arena, and an elderly vampire, some kind of neutral arbiter, stepped between them. "The challenge has been witnessed," the old vampire intoned. "Let it be known that this combat is binding under the ancient laws. No interference will be tolerated. Combat continues until one party yields or is destroyed." He looked between them. "Are both parties prepared?" "Yes," they said in unison. "Then begin." The arbiter vanished in a blur of speed, and instantly Dracal and Vasil were moving. They collided in the center of the arena with a sound like thunder, and Brielle's hands flew to her mouth. They moved so fast she could barely track them, exchanging blows that would have shattered concrete. Every impact sent shockwaves through the arena, and she realized she was seeing true vampire strength, for the first time power that made her own enhanced abilities look like nothing. Dracal's fist caught Vasil in the jaw, sending him flying backward to crash into the arena wall hard enough to crack the stone. But Vasil was up instantly, launching himself back into the fight with a roar. His claws raked across Dracal's chest, drawing blood that looked black in the torchlight. Back and forth they fought, neither giving quarter. Dracal was faster, his movements precise and economical. Vasil was more brutal, powering through Dracal's defenses with sheer ferocity. Blood splattered the arena floor, both of them bleeding now from dozens of wounds. Then Vasil got inside Dracal's guard and drove his clawed hand toward Dracal's heart. Brielle screamed, the sound tearing from her throat involuntarily. She saw Dracal twist at the last instant, taking the blow to his shoulder instead of his chest, but it still drove him to his knees. Vasil raised his hand for a killing strike, and Dracal's eyes blazed pure gold. Power exploded from him like a shockwave, sending Vasil stumbling backward. Dracal rose to his feet, and Brielle realized she was seeing something ancient and terrifying. This wasn't just a vampire anymore. This was something older, something primal. His wounds were closing even as she watched, flesh knitting together with supernatural speed. "Enough," Dracal said, and his voice echoed with layers of power that made the arena walls shake. "You wanted to see what I'm truly capable of, Vasil? Let me show you why I've ruled for 1,000 years." He moved, and even Brielle's vampire eyes couldn't track it. One moment he was across the arena, the next he had Vasil by the throat, holding him up with one hand. Vasil struggled, clawing at Dracal's arm, but he might as well have been trying to break free of a statue. "Yield," Dracal commanded. "Never," Vasil gasped. "Then die." Dracal's hand tightened, and Brielle heard bone crack. Vasil's eyes went wide with fear, real fear, perhaps the first time he'd felt it in centuries. His mouth opened and blood poured out. "I yield," he choked out. "I yield." Dracal held him there a moment longer, and Brielle could see the desire for vengeance in every line of his body. It would be so easy for him to finish it, to kill the vampire who'd threatened his territory and his love. Then he dropped Vasil to the ground, stepping back. "Leave my territory. You have until dawn. If I ever see you again, there will be no mercy." Vasil scrambled backward, his amber eyes filled with a mixture of fury and terror. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is." Dracal's voice was final as death. "Take your people and go. My patience has limits." Vasil's vampires rushed down from the seats to collect their defeated king, and they retreated in a disorganized mass toward the arena exits. The arbiter stepped forward again, raising his voice to be heard by all present. The challenge is concluded. Victory to King Drakel Vasiliu. Let all present bear witness. The vampires erupted in cheers and shouts, and Drakel turned to look up at where Brielle sat. His eyes found hers across the distance, and even from there she could see them shift from gold back to crimson. The terrifying ancient power receded, and he was just the man she loved again, battered and bloodied but victorious. She was down in the arena before she consciously decided to move, throwing herself into his arms despite the blood covering them both. He caught her, holding her close, and she felt him bury his face in her hair. "I told you I wouldn't lose," he murmured. "Don't ever scare me like that again," she said fiercely, pulling back to look at him. "When he almost if you'd been a second slower, but I wasn't." He cupped her face with both hands, seemingly oblivious to the hundreds of vampires watching. "I had something worth fighting for, worth living for." Then he kissed her there in the arena, in front of both courts, and made it absolutely clear to everyone present what she meant to him. The following weeks settled into a new rhythm. With Vasile gone and the challenge won, Drakel's authority was unquestioned. But more than that, his relationship with Brielle was now public knowledge. She was no longer just his progeny but his partner, and the court adjusted accordingly. Mahela eventually came to her, stiff and formal, to apologize for her earlier coldness. "I let jealousy cloud my judgment," she said. "You make him happy in ways I never could have. For that I should thank you, not resent you." Brielle accepted the apology, and slowly made friends among the court. She learned that vampires, despite their immortality and power, were still people with petty concerns and grand dreams, with kindness and cruelty in equal measure. Drakel taught her more about using her vampire abilities. She discovered she had a gift for speed even beyond what was normal for their kind. She could move so fast she was nearly invisible, a blur even to vampire eyes. It delighted Drakel, who encouraged her to practice and refine the skill. "Every vampire has something unique," he explained during one training session. "Some gift that manifests based on who they were as humans. Yours is speed. Use it well." She also learned about the political landscape of vampire society, the various kings and queens who ruled different territories, the complex web of alliances and enmities that stretched back centuries. It was fascinating and daunting in equal measure. She'd gone from a nobody to being romantically involved with one of the most powerful vampires in the world. But the best moments were the quiet ones. Evenings in his study, reading books that were older than countries. Nights walking through the castle gardens. Yes, there were gardens deep underground, lit by some kind of magical light that mimicked the moon. Mornings before dawn when they lay tangled together in his massive bed talking about everything and nothing. "Do you miss it?" he asked her one such morning. The sun, daylight. She considered the question seriously. She did miss it sometimes, missed the warmth on her skin, the brightness of a summer day. But when she thought about what she'd gained him, this new life, these incredible abilities, the trade-off seemed more than fair. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not as much as I thought I would, and certainly not enough to regret my choice. There are places," he said slowly, "far to the north where the nights last for months. During that time, it's safe for us to move above ground. We could travel there if you wanted, experience the sky again, even if not the sun." The thoughtfulness of the offer made her throat tight with emotion. "I'd like that. Someday," he agreed, pulling her closer. "We have all the time in the world now." But their peace was shattered 3 months later when word came of a different kind of threat. Drakel had been in an emergency council meeting when one of his scouts burst in, wild-eyed and terrified. Brielle had been allowed to sit in on council meetings now, and she rose with the rest of them at the scout's appearance. "My lord," the scout gasped, "the humans know." The room went utterly silent. "Explain," Drakel commanded, his voice deadly quiet. "There's been a breach. Someone leaked information about our existence to a human organization. They're calling themselves the Order of the Silver Dawn. They're hunters, my lord. And they're coming here. They know about the castle." Cases erupted in the council chamber. Vampires were shouting, arguing, demanding action. Brielle felt ice slide down her spine. Humans knew about vampires. About them. About this place. Everything they'd worked to keep secret for centuries was compromised. Drakel stood, and his power washed over the room like a cold wave, silencing everyone. "How many?" "We estimate 50, maybe more. They're armed with silver weapons, blessed water, the traditional tools. But they also have something new, some kind of weapon that fires UV light. It burned one of our sentries badly. UV weapons, artificial sunlight." Brielle remembered Drakel's words about the sun being deadly to their kind. These hunters weren't just traditional vampire killers, they'd adapted, modernized their methods. "When?" Drakel asked. "They'll be here by midnight tomorrow. We can evacuate the castle, scatter the court." "No." Drakel's voice was iron. "We've held this territory for 500 years. I won't abandon it to a mob of humans. We defend. My lord, they have daylight weapons. Then we'll be careful." He turned to his council. I want every entrance except the main gate sealed. Fortify the Great Hall, that's where we'll make our stand, and send word to our allies. If the humans have declared war on us, all vampire courts need to know. The council sprang into action, vampires hurrying off to carry out orders. Brielle moved to Drockel's side, keeping her voice low. Because you turned me. Drew attention. No. He caught her hand, squeezing gently. This has been brewing for years. The humans have suspected our existence for decades. Someone finally found proof, that's all. What do? We survive, together. He lifted her hand to his lips. I didn't go through all of this, breaking my vow, defeating Vasile, upending my entire existence just to lose you to a band of humans with silver bullets and UV lights. The next day was a flurry of preparation. The entire castle became a fortress, with guards posted at every entrance and weapons distributed to every vampire capable of fighting. Brielle was given a sword, real silver, ironically, which vampires could handle, despite the legends. Though it did sting slightly, and shown basic fighting techniques by Mihaela, who turned out to be an excellent swordmaster. You're fast, Mihaela said after watching her practice. Faster than most vampires I've seen. Use that. Get in, strike, get out. Don't let them pin you down with those UV weapons. Brielle practiced until her movements were smooth, instinctive. She didn't want to kill anyone. They'd been human so recently that the thought of fighting humans made her sick. But she also wasn't going to let herself or Drockel be destroyed. As midnight approached, the court assembled in the Great Hall. Every vampire in the castle was present, perhaps 200 in total, all armed and ready. Drockel stood before his throne, and when he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the space. We face an enemy that seeks to destroy us out of fear and ignorance. They don't understand what we are, so they wish to wipe us from existence. But we are not monsters despite what they believe. We have rules, laws, honor. We feed but do not murder. We exist in balance with the human world, taking only what we need and giving compensation in return. He paused, his crimson eyes sweeping the assembled vampires. Tonight we defend not just our home, but our very right to exist. We will show these hunters that we are not easy prey, that we have lived for centuries and will continue to live for centuries more. And if we must fight, we will fight with all the strength and cunning that has allowed us to survive this long. A cheer went up from the assembly, and Brielle felt her own determination harden. They would survive this. They had to. The hunters arrived precisely at midnight, and the first warning was an explosion at the main gate. The boom echoed through the castle, followed by shouting and the sound of metal striking stone. Drockel's eyes flashed gold, and he gestured to his guards. Hold them at the entrance corridors, make them fight for every foot. And remember, we aim to disable, not to kill. These are misguided humans, not our true enemies. The guards rushed off, and soon the sounds of battle echoed through the castle. Brielle wanted to go with them, to fight. But Drockel had ordered her to stay in the Great Hall with him and the rest of the court. You're too new, he'd said, too important to risk. So she waited, listening to the distant sounds of combat and trying not to imagine Drockel's people dying to protect them. Then the hunters broke through. They flooded into the Great Hall in a wave of silver and steel, and at their head was a woman with cold eyes and graying hair, carrying what looked like a high-tech rifle. She raised it, and brilliant white light burst from the barrel, UV light, concentrated and deadly. The beam caught one of the younger vampires in the chest, and he screamed, his skin blackening and cracking as if exposed to the sun. Other vampires rushed to drag him to safety while the rest surged forward to meet the hunters. The hall erupted into chaos. Silver weapons clashed against vampire strength. UV beams sliced through the air, forcing vampires to scatter and dodge. Brielle found herself in the thick of it, her enhanced speed allowing her to dart between hunters, disarming them and knocking them aside without killing. She was fast, faster than she'd realized, faster than the hunters could track. She became a blur, a ghost, taking down enemy after enemy until a small pile of unconscious hunters lay around her. Then she saw the gray-haired woman with the UV rifle take aim at Drockel. He was fighting 3 hunters at once, his attention divided, and didn't see the threat. The woman's finger tightened on the trigger, and Brielle moved. She was a streak of motion, covering the distance in a heartbeat, and threw herself between Drockel and the weapon. The UV beam struck her full in the chest, and agony like nothing she'd ever imagined tore through her. It was fire and acid and the death of every cell all at once. She heard herself screaming, felt her body beginning to crumble under the artificial sunlight. Then Drockel was there, ripping the weapon from the woman's hands and crushing it like paper. He caught Brielle as she fell, cradling her against his chest as her burned skin began to heal with agonizing slowness. "Brielle," he gasped, and she'd never heard such fear in his voice. "You foolish, brave, impossible girl." Had to, she managed through the pain. Couldn't let her hurt you. His eyes were pure gold now, blazing with an emotion she couldn't name. Then he stood, still holding her, and his power filled the entire hall. Every vampire froze. Every hunter stopped mid-motion. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. Drakel roared, and his voice shook the stone walls. The gray-haired woman, now disarmed and on her knees where Drakel had thrown her, looked up at him with hatred. Monster, you prey on humans. Steal their lives. We steal nothing. Drakel's voice was cold as the grave. We take only from those who volunteer. We compensate them. We have rules, laws older than your civilization. And you attack us because you're afraid of what you don't understand. You're abominations. We're survivors. We've existed alongside humanity for millennia, causing no harm to those who don't threaten us. You're the ones who came here with weapons and hatred. He looked around at the other hunters, most of whom were now disarmed or unconscious. I should kill you all for what you've done. For attacking my home, my people. For nearly killing the woman I love. Brielle stirred in his arms and he looked down at her. His expression softened immediately, the rage melting into concern. You're healing. Thank the darkness. I'm okay, she whispered, though the burns still screamed across her chest. Don't kill them, please. They're just scared. He stared at her for a long moment, then looked back at the hunters. You're lucky she has more mercy than I do. Here are your options. You can leave now, return to your organization, and tell them what happened here. Tell them that we defended ourselves but spared your lives. Tell them that we don't want war, but we'll destroy anyone who threatens us. Or his eyes flashed dangerously. You can refuse and discover exactly how dangerous we can be when pushed. The gray-haired woman met his gaze steadily. If we leave, we'll just come back. With more people. Better weapons. We won't stop until your kind is wiped out, then you'll die trying. Drakel's voice was matter of fact. Because we won't stop existing just because you're afraid. We have as much right to live as you do. Silence fell across the hall. Brielle could see the hunters looking at each other, uncertainty creeping into their expressions. They'd come expecting monsters, but what they'd found was an organized society defending itself. Vampires who showed mercy even after being attacked. Finally, a younger man stepped forward. I'll go. I'll tell them what I saw here, that you spared us when you could have killed us all. He looked at his leader. Commander, this isn't right. They're not what we were told. The commander's face worked with emotion, rage, fear, uncertainty, but slowly she nodded. All right, we'll withdraw, but this isn't forgiveness. You're still monsters, still wrong. Think what you wish. Drakel waved a hand. Just leave my territory and don't return. The hunters gathered their wounded and retreated, and slowly the tension in the hall began to ease. Vampires moved to tend the injured, clean up the damage, begin repairs. But Drakel stood unmoving, still holding Brielle, his eyes fixed on her burned skin as it slowly knit itself back together. You shouldn't have done that, he said softly. The UV light could have destroyed you. You're too young, too new, you don't heal as fast as I do, I know. She reached up to touch his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. But I wasn't going to let her hurt you. Not when I could prevent it. You could have died, so could you? She pulled him down until his forehead rested against hers. We're in this together, remember? For better or worse. She felt him shudder, felt his arms tighten around her. When I saw that light hit you, I thought for the first time in 1,000 years I felt true terror. The thought of losing you. You didn't lose me. I'm right here. He kissed her then, deep and desperate and filled with all the emotion he usually kept locked away. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were wet with blood tears. Marry me, he said. Brielle blinked, sure she'd misheard. What? Marry me by human custom and vampire law. Bind yourself to me formally, completely. His hands framed her face with infinite gentleness. I love you, Brielle Foster. I've lived 1,000 years without you, and I don't want to spend another day not being able to call you my wife. She started laughing, then crying, blood tears mixing with joy. Yes, yes, you impossible, dramatic, wonderful man, I'll marry you. The wedding was held a month later, after the castle had been repaired, and the remaining tensions with the human hunters had settled into an uneasy truce. Word had spread through the human organization about what had happened, how the vampires had shown mercy, had spared lives when they could have slaughtered. It didn't erase the fear and hatred completely, but it opened the door for dialogue, for the possibility of peace. The ceremony itself was a blend of human and vampire traditions. They stood before the assembled court in the great hall, which had been decorated with thousands of candles and dark flowers that bloomed only in the underground gardens. Brielle wore a gown of midnight blue silk that made her pale skin glow and her white hair shine like starlight. Drakel wore formal black embroidered with silver thread, looking like the king he was. The vampire who officiated spoke in an ancient language that Brielle barely understood, but she felt the weight of the words, the magic in them binding her to Drakel in ways that went beyond legal or religious. This was a soul bond, recognized by vampire law as unbreakable. They would be linked forever, able to sense each other's emotions, their lives intertwined until the end of time. When it came time for the vows, Drakel took her hands in his and spoke with quiet intensity. I vow to protect you, cherish you, and stand by your side for all eternity. I vow to honor your choices, respect your strength, and never take for granted the gift of your love. You saved me, Brielle, not from the UV light, but from an existence of loneliness and isolation. You gave me a reason to hope again, and I will spend forever showing you how grateful I am." Brielle's own voice was thick with emotion as she replied, "I vow to love you with everything I am, for as long as we both exist. I vow to stand with you against whatever challenges come, to be your partner in all things. You gave me a second chance at life, and I want to spend that life making you as happy as you've made me. You're my home now, my family, my everything." They exchanged rings, simple bands of white gold engraved with symbols that represented their joined houses. And when the officiant pronounced them married by both human and vampire law, Drakel kissed her with such tenderness that she heard several vampires in the audience sigh. The celebration afterward was magnificent. Vampires from courts across the world had come to witness the marriage of one of the oldest vampire kings, and they filled the castle with music and laughter, and for those who still indulged blood wine. Brielle danced with Drakel, with Mihaela, who'd become a genuine friend, with other members of the court who'd accepted her fully now as their queen. The title still felt strange, but Drakel assured her she'd grow into it. "You already have," he said as they stole a moment alone on one of the castle's high balconies, looking out over the underground kingdom. "You lead with compassion and wisdom. The court loves you. I love you. I love you too." She leaned against him, feeling utterly content. "Do you ever regret it? Turning me that night?" "Never, not for a single moment." He turned her to face him, his crimson eyes soft in the candlelight. "You were right that first night. Maybe I should stop trying to understand why I felt compelled to save you. Maybe it was fate or destiny, or just the universe arranging for me to be in the right place at the right time. All I know is that you're the best thing that's happened to me in 1,000 years. She kissed him, pouring everything she felt into it, love and gratitude and joy and the promise of forever. When they finally pulled apart, she was breathless despite not needing air. "So what now?" she asked. "What does happily ever after look like for vampires?" He laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Whatever we want it to. We have eternity to figure it out. Travel the world, explore the night, build something beautiful. Together, she agreed, and the word felt like a promise, a vow, a certainty. They stood on that balcony for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, while the celebration continued below them. The future stretched ahead, infinite and unknowable, but Brielle found she wasn't afraid. How could she be, when she had forever with the man who'd lifted a steel beam off her with one hand, whose eyes had changed color as he saved her life and changed it forever? She'd been dying in the darkness, and he'd brought her into the light, a different kind of light than the sun, but no less warm, the light of love, of purpose, of belonging. She was home now, truly home, in a way she'd never been as a human. And as dawn approached and they retreated inside to sleep away the dangerous daylight hours, Brielle knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. Every choice that had led her to that construction site, to that fallen beam, to Drakel and this new extraordinary life. She was exactly where she was meant to be. The years passed, though in the timeless existence of vampires they seemed both endless and fleeting. Brielle grew into her role as queen, learning to rule beside Drakel with grace and strength. She became known throughout the vampire world for her mercy and her speed, for the way she could negotiate peace between warring factions and defend her territory with equal skill. The relationship with the human hunters evolved too. After that first attack, there were meetings, negotiations. A tentative peace emerged, with rules about territories and feeding that both sides could live with. It wasn't perfect, and there were still humans who hated and feared vampires, but it was better than war. Drakel remained as devoted as ever, his love for Brielle only deepening with time. They traveled the world together, visiting other vampire kingdoms and exploring the wonders of the night. He showed her the aurora borealis from a frozen mountain peak during the long Arctic winter. They walked through markets in cities whose names changed with the centuries. They danced in ancient ruins and made love in castles older than memory. And through it all, Brielle never forgot that moment in the construction site, the weight of the beam, the certainty of death, and then his face appearing from the shadows like salvation. His eyes changing from crimson to gold as he lifted the impossible weight with one hand and gave her a choice that would define eternity. Sometimes, in quiet moments, she would ask him about that night. "Why did your eyes change color?" And he would pull her close and murmur, "They change when I feel strong emotion, when my power rises to meet a challenge." That night I was feeling both the challenge of saving you and the emotion of knowing I had to. That you were mine to protect even before either of us understood what that would mean. It was the answer of a man who'd lived 1,000 years and learned to trust his instincts. And Brielle, who'd been given a second chance at life in the most unexpected way possible, couldn't argue with results. She'd been saved by a vampire king in a construction site at midnight, and in saving her, he'd saved himself from an eternity of loneliness. They'd found each other in the darkness, and together they'd built something bright enough to last forever. And as they lay together in their chamber deep beneath the earth, safe from the sun that would destroy them but no longer feared because they had each other, Brielle knew that every moment of her human life had been leading to this, to him, to them, to forever. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "And I love you," Drakel replied, his arms tightening around her, "for all eternity, until the stars burn out and time itself ends." It was a promise he would keep, a promise they would both keep, because their love story had started with a fallen beam and changed eyes and an impossible rescue, but it would never end. Not in this life or any other. They had forever. And forever, it turned out, was exactly long enough.